Okay, let's continue with Donatello's sculptures, and we're in again chapter 21, and it's the Renaissance in the 15th century, or also known as the Quattrocento of Italy. Okay, Florence, Italy in particular. Okay, so we're going to look at figure 21.11, and this is Donatello's David. And again, we're going to be harnessing, or they are going to be harnessing the Greco-Roman styles and aesthetics, such as sensualism, such as contrapposto, such as organic drapery, verism, which is super realism, that's Verism, characteristics that are very historical to these classical texts as well, coming from the Greco-Roman times. And the Greco-Roman times, again, is dating all the way back to 900 BCE, before Common Era, all the way to around 23 CE. All right. So the Greek period was 900, the geometric Greek period, 900 BCE, all the way up to around 220 BCE, which is the time that the Hellenistic Alexander the Great Macedonian king empire had fallen. Then it was divided into three, and that's the Greek period. And in the Roman period, the Republic started around 700, 750 BCE during the Republic period, where Italy was consolidating all the different regions into one governance, the Republic, different representatives from different city-states. And then it became an empire, and then it lasted until about 23, 25 CE, okay? Maybe a little bit after that. So those are the big time frames in regards to the Greek and Roman influences in the world. And then now during this Renaissance period, these artists are harnessing all of those super important styles that occurred during both the Greek and the Roman periods. So what Donatello's doing with David, some of the very major Greco-Roman elements, is he's reviving the freestanding nude. We saw the nude present in Ghiberti as well in Burlesque and in in those two in particular, with the sacrifice of Isaac in that competition in the last video we talked about, but not freestanding. All right, they were in relief. So those pieces were casted in bronze in relief. And here we have a bronze freestanding nude sculpture, which is David. And it's a biblical Orthodox, Christian Orthodox tale of the underdog overthrowing and defeating the Goliath, or the supposed winner of the situation. And David is actually the one who becomes victorious. And David becomes a very important symbol to Florence, as I mentioned in the last video, because Florence was being governed, or not governed, but kind of hassled, harassed a bit by larger local regional influences, and Florence just held its own, very much like David, and won and came out successful with its heavy wealth, as well as mercantile trade and exchange and banking and commerce. That bubbled up from the core of Florence, and they held their own. So David becomes an allegorical, not just a biblical parable, but an allegorical representation of Florence's victory during this time. So what Donatello's doing is he's reviving this freestanding nude, and he was the first to do this during the time, the first. We're going to see lots of nude sculptures coming up with the high to late Renaissance artists, in particular with Michelangelo. But Donatello was the first to, again, revive the freestanding nude sculpture. All right. And being life-size, so 5 feet, 2 inches and a quarter tall. All right. So pretty much life-size, maybe a little less, maybe more 3/4, but definitely on the verge or cusp of being life size. Okay. And another thing is, again, there's the Orthodox element. This is not a Greek god, nor a Greek athlete, but it is showing the same characteristics that we saw during the Greek period. And what we see is that classical stance in particular. And that classical stance that he has, very much like we saw with St. Mark previously in the other video, is what's called that contrapposto. The contrapposto. And that contrapposto, the stance of the imaginary S curve moving throughout the body, is supposed to be a very sensual beauty. It creates a sensual beauty in the body. So the aesthetic is the beautification of the body. And what the Greeks were doing is they were using the body almost like a mathematical formula to show beauty through mathematics. And that is coming out here again. And Donatello is doing that for the first time. Leonardo's going to do that. Raphael's going to do that. Michelangelo is going to start with it, but he's going to break from it. He's going to say mathematics is actually not the key to beauty, and he's going to create his own unapologetic styles, so to speak, which is going to lead into mannerism, which is at the end of chapter 22. So we're going to move away from the Renaissance at that time. But here at the beginning of the Renaissance, they're locking back into the mathematical elements of control of the human body through these trigonometry, which is a sine curve, or a cosine curve, and that S curve, which is a sine curve, SINE, is a trigonometry wave curve, which is a mathematical staple upon the formulation of the figure in antiquity. And Donatello is bringing that back, and he's the first to bring that back. And by showing the figure nude, is it shows control of emotion. He just defeated this huge Goliath figure, but he doesn't look bothered, exhausted, emotional about the situation at all. He just did his duty. He was very rational about it. And that's what the humanism in this time period of the Renaissance is going to be about, bringing rationalism back to the art world. Okay, we saw it in the use of the linear perspective. Now we're seeing it in the use of the mathematical formulae they're using in this contrapposto stance to beautify the sculpture based off of mathematics. Okay, so this will be happening for a while with Leonardo and Raphael, and then Michelangelo is going to kind of break it up a little bit. So again, it's a classical stance, and it shows sensuous beauty based off of this mathematical sensuous curve, which again is very Greco-Roman. Right? I have one more that I want to talk about in regards to Donatello. Again, if we had all semester just to cover the Renaissance, there are classes in four-year universities where it is just all about the Renaissance and just Greek and Roman art, and there are whole semesters worth of classes. We would be able to do that, but we can't. We don't have that time. So I kind of have to abbreviate or not abbreviate, but filter in the really essential pieces during this time. That doesn't mean you shouldn't look at the other things, but I will only test you and ask you questions on the actual images and figures that I'm pointing out specifically in these videos. So we're going to look at Gattamelata, the equestrian statue of Erasmo da Narni by Donatello, figure 21.15. And what we're looking at here is a couple things, and remember, every time we talk about a piece, we're going to kind of signify the importance of the Greco-Roman rebirth of that antiquity in these pieces. And what it is in particular about this is, well, we're back to large-scale bronze sculptures. So this is 12 feet tall, something that we saw a little bit in early medieval Europe north of the Alps in the Ottonian period with Charlemagne. But now we're really starting to see it come back around during this time, during this Renaissance period. And what's particular about the Greco-Roman is really a lot of nod to the Roman in particular to this. And that's back to rich bronze horse sculptures from that Roman period. And during the Roman Empire, all the way from the early period up to the late, the emperors were seen, except for Constantine at the very end, the emperors were seen riding horses. There were three main staple presentations of the emperor, and one was walking barefooted upon the ground, which is the Primavera, the Augustus, and a second one is going to be riding the horse, the equestrian. And by showing this placement upon the horse, it shows world dominion. And so they're taking this controlled factor that was used during the Roman Empire, and they're transplanting or subplanting those Roman emperor concepts and styles with this individual that's very important with Florence, Italy at the time. And if you notice on the hoof, the front right or the front left hoof of the horse, it's placed upon a small orb. That orb was a symbolic gesture used during the Roman period to show world dominion, that orb. And you can see that the horse is touching it. So they're bringing back this Roman symbolism in this sculpture of Gattamelata. All right. Another thing that's very Roman about this is the verism, the realism, showing the true features of this individual, Erasmo. Okay, by showing this true features on his face and exactly what his head, his face, his facial features look like, his stature, his height, the way his hair was clustered, is called verism. Again, Verism. And it's super realism based off of the historical importance of this individual. The Greeks, on the other hand, had a tendency, at least through the majority of their time, and from the classical to the high to the late before it becomes Hellenistic, was to idealize the figure and not show blemishes, which is something that they kind of derive from the Egyptians and the pharaohs prior to. But the Romans, on the other hand, were very historical in nature, and they wanted to show these very specific details of these individuals. And that's why the verism and that Roman influence of style is again present in Gattamelata by Donatello, figure 21.15. And one last thing about this sculpture is that he is nodding to the ground to again show dominance, but also to give a level of mercy. Okay, so what would happen often in the Roman sculptures with the empires is they would look upward while holding this orb or having their horse place its hoof upon the orb, which shows divine presence. But in this case, his head, the technique is there, which is Roman, but his head is casted down, which is an indicator of mercy. Okay, so it's different but similar. The use of the orb, the placement of the figure, Erasmo, upon the horse is making him an equestrian, which is a Roman style, but his eyes and his face casting downward shows that he's willing to look down upon others that are below him on the horse, which is an indicator of merciful rule and leadership. Versus the emperors in the Roman Empire time, they often, like there's a horse equestrian sculpture of Marcus Aurelius where he's looking out and he's actually bigger than the horse. So the proportions are way off to show the pretentiousness of the emperor, Marcus Aurelius. But here, the figure, Gattamelata, is diminutive. He's small in comparison to the horse. So his presence is more true and honest to his stature in relation to the horse, which isn't showing a pretentiousness. And by his face looking downward, it even adds to the lack of pretentiousness. All right, so and that equates to the idea of being merciful. All right, so there is that difference, but there's also the connection to the Roman techniques, but still showing the mercifulness. And maybe a lot of the Orthodox Christianity themes of mercy and compassion and tolerance, turning the other cheek, trying to balance things out, has a big part, has a lot to do with the overall disposition of Eramos on the horse. Okay, figure 21.5, 21.15. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on and end this. This is already at 15 minutes, and that will conclude Donatello. And then the next video, we're going to get into the paintings of Florence and also discuss the architecture. And that will be one video as well. All right, so I'll leave you at that, and then I'll see you back here in regards to the paintings of Florence Renaissance during the 15th century.